cities in the vicinity, and those would be a key target that would have political impact in addition to a military impact, and I think that they would be likely on General Schwarzkopf's list of important targets.
As we continue our CBS News live coverage of war in the Middle East, General Dugan, the first order of business is to get command of the sky, so-called air superiority. The second order of business would be to take out the Scud missiles, or is that likely to be undertaken simultaneously?
There's a lot of things one does simultaneously, Dan. Air superiority is a condition that one wants to establish so that one can use his air forces to do a whole range of other tasks.
General, forgive me, please. As part of our live coverage, a state of emergency is being declared in Israel. We go to CBS News correspondent Tom Fenton. Tom?
Dan, that was the Israeli Army spokesman who declared the state of emergency, and he instructed the public to open up these little gas mask kit boxes we've all been carrying around with us for the last few days. They contain gas masks with filters for chemical warfare, atropine syringes, and antidote to nerve gas. The public has been told to open up these kits, which were sealed when they were given them, but not to put the masks on yet. As you know, Saddam Hussein threatened to attack Israel if he were attacked, and the assumption is that the attack would be with chemical weapons, missiles, Scud missiles, which could hit Tel Aviv, and tipped with chemical warheads. Iraq is expected or suspected of having as many as 20 chemical warheads. It's not known, however, whether any of these have been loaded onto missiles. Israel has pinpointed a number of missile sites in western Iraq that it would hit if attacked, and has even indicated it might go so far as to attack Baghdad. Dan?
Tom Fenton, stay on the line with us from Israel. A state of emergency declared in Israel, so far as we can determine strictly as precaution. Retired Air Force General Michael Dugan, what would be the threat to Israel? We talk about the threat of the Scud missiles. How real, how viable is that threat, and what other threats might there be?
The major threat is, in fact, Scud missiles, and it's probably Scud missiles with something like a chemical warhead. The Scud missile has a decent range, but it's not a particularly accurate missile. Indeed, some military analysts have said that it is not militarily effective because while it might come close to an air base, it might come close to a major military formation, it in fact will not key in on specific identifiable targets at the headquarters of that formation. So Scud missiles with chemical warheads on them, for example, against a well-prepared and well-trained army that has chemical decontamination equipment, that has gas masks, has chemical suits, is not a particularly effective military weapon. It's a terrorist weapon, Dan.
And speaking of terrorism, of course, part of the Iraqi plan, which they said in advance, one, they said they would attempt to bring Israel into the war as quickly as possible. Saddam Hussein said it. He said it to me in our interview in August. His top aides repeated it in our most recent trip to Baghdad just a few days ago. They also said that they would not rule out the possibility of using chemical weapons. At one time in August they said they would, but then that went by the boards. Tom Fenton, any air raid signals or sirens in Israel, or what we have is simply this, I say simply, the important declaring of a state of emergency?
No, that's what we have so far. Now, the Israelis are assuming it will be chemical warheads if they're used, and that's an important thing to know, because if they're conventional warheads, Israelis would be told to go down into the basements and bomb shelters. If it's chemical, they'd be told to go inside buildings and go into the upper floors. You may remember from the Iraqi attack on the Kurds in Halabja, these were Iraqi citizens, that many people went down into their basements and died there because the poison gas tends to seek a lower level. So far, that's all we have. We may get more instructions later in the night. We may also hear more about what, if anything, the Israeli Air Force is going to do. At the moment, all we know is that the Israelis have promised the United States they would not stage a preemptive attack. A war is now underway. Whether the Israelis would take some action now is simply an open question. Dan?
Tom, General Dugan, and before I come to you again, General Dugan, for those of you who are joining our broadcast now, let us pause for a second and say this is part of what will be our continuing CBS News coverage of war in and around the Persian Gulf. So far as can be determined in the early stages, we're in the first three and a half hours of the war. It is an air war. General Michael Dugan was until very recently the United States Air Force top military officer. You may recall that he was relieved of his command and he left the service because it was alleged that he spoke too candidly about the kind of rolling air thunder the United States could muster against Iraq if it became necessary. Now, General Dugan is now a CBS News consultant. You'll be seeing him exclusively as part of our coverage. Retired U.S. Marine General George Christ, who has been helping us right along here for a few months, at one time, not too long ago, commanded all U.S. forces in and around the Persian Gulf. It is one of the ranking military authorities on the Iraq-Iran war, on Iraq's capability, and on U.S. military capability. A reminder that the President of the United States will be addressing the American people and the world on the subject of war in the Middle East, a war that is now underway at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll be here, of course, to cover that with you live. Now, General Dugan, thanks for being patient with us here. We were talking earlier that you thought that in terms of offensive or strike-back capability, which the Iraqis seemed bound to try, if indeed they aren't trying, the Scud missile was number one. In terms of piloted aircraft, their best aircraft is the French-made Mirage?
That's their best air-to-air airplane. In terms of strike capabilities, Dan, their best airplane is probably the Su-24. General Christ mentioned a few minutes ago that it is similar to in size and shape and mission to F-111s that the United States Air Force operates.
General, if I'm not sure, as part of our live coverage, that you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, but are you seeing the map that has Baghdad and Iraq in the various circles?
I do see that map.
Let's talk for just quickly now. We're talking about Iraq's capabilities. First, reading upper left around, the Al-Hussein missile, which is capable of reaching in that outer perimeter area. What is that missile? What is it designed to do?
It is an Iraqi upgrade, essentially, of a Scud missile. The Iraqis have industrial capability internal to their nation. They have some engineering capability in terms of design, and it is a land attack missile, surface-to-surface missile that carries typically a conventional general purpose warhead that would go against a mix of targets.
And if the Iraqis were firing missiles at Dhahran or Riyadh, would it be safe to believe that possibly it would be one of those kind of missiles, the Al-Hussein or Scud?
That's certainly a possibility, Dan.
Now, if we can go back to that map with the various strike areas and put it up again, I want to quickly run down the other capabilities. And the Al-Abbas missile, is that also a Scud?
Again, it's an upgrade of a Scud. It's a conversion of a Scud. It follows along the similar kinds of lines and forms and size and shape.
All right. Now, and the Mirage F-1E fighter, a French aircraft, you say is their best air-to-air. And if, as we believe, that as we speak, air-to-air combat is underway, that is one plane against another over Iraq, it's most likely that the Iraqis would have the Mirage, or is that too much to believe?
No, one should expect that the Mirages would be up, and if you were disappointed and wrong, if you were wrong, you wouldn't be disappointed. But the Mirages are probably their most capable fighters in some regards because of the training given to the Mirage pilots. The Mirage pilots were trained by the French when they sold the equipment to Iraq. And they were trained in much more flexible tactics than is typical of the general Iraqi pilot brigade that was trained largely following Soviet tactics.
General Dugan, our CBS News consultant, until recently commander of the United States Air Force, I think many people do not yet realize that in modern air-to-air combat and air-to-ground combat, a great deal of it is done by computer and done with electronics. But insofar as it gets down to one fighter pilot against another, what's it like up there? What's it like up there tonight for a person, a young man in the cockpit of a U.S. fighter plane?
It's lonely, man. Most of our fighters are, in fact, single-seat fighters. We had a discussion a few minutes ago about the F-15E. It, in fact, has 2 seats in it. A pilot in the front and a weapons system officer that runs the radar and does the intercept activities. The F-111, which is a interdiction bomber, has 2 people in it. But most of the F-15s Most of the F-16s, all